What is up guys, Blue Spooky here with another daily video. If you guys are enjoying these daily videos, especially these longer hour-and-a-half ones, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Doing any of those, let alone all of them, really helps the channel to do well and the videos to do well, and ensures I can continue making these for a long time to come. If you guys are curious about all the censored words lately, I've been receiving a lot of strikes for inappropriate language, quote unquote. So I've been trying to censor out anything that might get me flagged. If you guys would like to support the channel even further, because these videos all getting flagged as soon as they're posted does really affect the channel, you can go ahead and click that join button below the subscribe button. The lowest tier is $2 a month, and you get special emoticons to comment with, and a special icon appears next to your name when you make a comment. It's of course completely optional, and no content will ever be hidden behind a paywall. It's simply an extra way for you to support the channel if you'd like to. Without further ado though guys, I will get right into the next hour and 30 minutes of true scary stories, and I hope you guys enjoy them and have a great day. Before I tell you this story, I'd like to give a brief description of karaoke in Japan. Usually it takes place in a room where you and your friends and family rent for a predetermined amount of time. You can pick whatever you want to sing and have drinks and snacks delivered directly to the room. It's pretty amazing. You don't have to get up and sing in front of others at a bar or anything, and you always pay at the end. It's a fun and pretty relaxing time. Anyway, on to the rest of the story. This happened one Saturday afternoon. I went to karaoke with a couple of friends in a little area of our small town. We really liked doing karaoke because on the same floor there was a game center as well. A big, huge arcade. Basically all the second floor of the building was entirely entertainment. They were very popular, especially on the weekend. That Saturday afternoon was no exception to this rule. We were pretty lucky to even grab a karaoke room, but somehow we managed to do so. We were in there having fun for about an hour or so, until something happened. All of a sudden, our song cut out halfway through, and so did the air conditioning and the lights as well. Luckily, it was in the middle of the day, as we might have really freaked out otherwise. We looked at one another in confusion. My friends and I were confused at the unusual situation we found ourselves in. I really didn't think it would take long for the power to come back on. Surely someone would fix it as quickly as possible. I turned out to be completely wrong though. The minutes crawled by, and we remained trapped in the dark room. I think about 10 minutes went by when we realized it was not going to be such a quick fix. It was really weird, and it was ruining the vibe. Well, I didn't want to just sit there, of course, so I told my friends I'd try and head down to the front desk and see what was going on. I managed to open the karaoke room door in the darkness, and my heart started to pound in my chest. I felt like something was off, more than just the power. I knew what it was immediately. All the other karaoke rooms were completely silent, but not just that. The arcade, all the machines, the entire area was silent. It had been really busy earlier, but now it was eerily quiet. All I could think about was getting down to the front desk to see what was going on and when the power would be restored. Even if all the customers had gone outside, surely there must be someone at the front desk still, right? I mean, they wouldn't just leave us there all alone, would they? I went to the front desk and, to my surprise, it was completely unmanned. There was no one there, no signs of life at all. There was, however, some form of light, an emergency exit, giving off a faint glow. I stood there wondering what the hell was going on. It was like I was on the set of some apocalyptic movie. I didn't know what to do. I knew that whatever was happening, it surely wasn't good. I grabbed my friends and told them we should probably leave right now. I showed them the completely empty karaoke and games arcade. We gathered up our things and headed out. We left the money for the karaoke at the front desk. I was feeling really anxious. I just wanted to go home. I started looking around kind of fearfully. I didn't understand the reason the place was suddenly empty. I guessed it had something to do with the blackout. I looked over toward the source of light that I mentioned earlier, the dimly lit emergency exit light. That was when I saw something moving in the darkness. It was clear that something was back there, just out of sight behind one of the claw machines. It certainly looked like a human being, but it was a solid black shadow. I said to my friends, now that we'd left the money, we needed to go right now. I pointed out what I'd just seen to my friends. We hit the button for the elevator outside. While we waited for it, we couldn't help but look over at that figure again. It was doing this weird kind of twisting movement, almost like a dance of some sort. It was moving between the game machines in the arcade, scampering between them to remain hidden, all the while doing these weird twisting dancing movements. It was dark enough that I couldn't really see well, but I clearly thought it was a person, and they seemed to be getting closer and closer to us. That's when my friend shouted, "Why don't we just take the stairs?" I don't know why the thought of taking them had never crossed our minds. I mean, we were in the middle of a power outage. Why would we think of taking the elevator? We managed to get out of there safely, but we ran like we had never run before. We didn't stop until we made it to my friend's house. Thankfully, she lived pretty close by. When we calmed down a little bit, we sat around, talking about all kinds of things. We tried to find an explanation as to what had just occurred, but we really couldn't come up with anything logical. What reason would everyone have to leave at the same time? It felt like we'd suffered some simultaneous nightmare, a shared memory of some horrible dream. We never did figure it out, but we did summon the courage to go back to the karaoke place one day. Nothing else happened, though. We asked if they remembered the recent power outage, but the staff member I spoke to said that he was the only one on duty that day, and he didn't seem to recall anything of the sort. It was really weird. The power outage certainly happened, but that's about the only thing that I'm certain of, to be honest. I have no idea what that dancing shadow man was, and I have no interest in finding out, really. It was like we were all just spirited away that day or something. This happened way back when I was in college. This year, it will have been 12 years ago since I was there. Like I said, I was in a university in Tokyo. I was staying with a relative. At the time, I really didn't want to feel like I was missing out on my college experience. It was like I was a young adult who still had a bedtime. Oh, and on top of that, my aunt didn't even live anywhere near campus. It took me about an hour just to get there, and an hour back as well. Luckily, a former high school classmate of mine lived in the area, just west of the campus. He went to a different college, though. On the night that this experience took place, I decided to stop off at my friend's place. By the way, my friend lived on the 5th floor of a 6-story building. It was a pretty dark night, real standard autumn fare. My friend was lying down on his bed listening to some music, and I was just playing some random game on the PlayStation. I don't remember what it was, really. Some sort of golf game, maybe? All of a sudden, though, there was a really dull click, and all the lights and power went out simultaneously. At the time, I really didn't get freaked out or anything. I thought we must have overloaded the circuit, or someone in the building had caused an outage. I asked my friend where the breaker was, so we could figure things out. It wasn't just one thing that went out, but everything. The circuit breaker wasn't actually in my friend's apartment. It was outside in the hall in this sheltered box thing. We stepped down and flipped all the switches. Everything came back on at once. There I was, back to gaming, but not even 5 minutes later, the power suddenly cut out again. Well, now it seemed very weird. I don't think my friend and I were using too much energy. I went out to my friend's balcony and took a look down to see if any of the other apartments below were also out of power. I could see that a few lights were on down there, so it clearly wasn't an issue affecting the entire building. Certainly not a blackout. Whatever was happening was solely affecting my friend's place. I called my friend out to the balcony to see what he thought of the situation. As we were talking out there, we suddenly heard a knock at the door. My friend was a really popular guy. I guess his place gave a kind of hangout spot kind of vibe. When we heard the door, we just mumbled something like, someone else came over, huh? He went to answer it. I was a little suspicious, though. I thought maybe someone might be messing with us. Maybe someone was doing a little ding-dong ditch, so to speak. We called it ding-dong dash here. He went to the door, and it seemed there was no one there. Quite strange. I asked him if maybe he had a friend who was playing a prank on him or something. You know, the lights going out, the ding-dong ditching. With that in mind, I went and flipped the switches on the breaker once more. It was annoying and strange, but I had locked into staying over at my friend's house at that point. There wasn't much I could do about the situation. As soon as I walked back into his apartment and walked over to my friend, the door began to knock behind me again. I looked over at my friend. The breaker tripped once more, and we were plunged back into darkness. While we were in the dark, the person began to pound on the door. I raced over to it. At that point, I wanted to catch whoever was messing with us in the act. I threw open the door, only to find that there was no one out there. I stepped out into the communal hallway to look around. I was looking for any signs of movement, even a shadow, maybe the elevator going up or down, but there was no one there. I couldn't hear a single thing. Even though there was no one around, I didn't feel like being in that hallway. It was freaking me out. I headed back into my friend's apartment, and my friend said to me, "Something is wrong, isn't it?" As if to answer his question, immediately the pounding on the door began again. I won't lie, like I imagine some people do when they recount experiences like this. My friend and I hugged each other in fear. I'm not embarrassed to say I even cried a little. It was scary. I could feel his body trembling. Reluctantly, we got back up and opened the door to confront whoever was messing with us, only to once again find the hallway empty. My friend suddenly got this idea in his head that we were being disturbed by the paranormal. I went with him into the kitchen. Neither of us wanted to be alone or far apart from one another. There in the dark, he started shaking salt all over the place. I could hear it scattering all around. He even covered himself in it and dashed some on me as well. He was really worked up at that point. We went out onto the balcony, and he was just putting salt into the palm of his hand and eating it. He encouraged me to do the same. I didn't think that we were being messed with by some spirit, though. I was pretty sure we were being messed with by a very real human being. Why someone would do that to him, I'm not sure. Maybe we were being too noisy or something. Maybe it was one of his neighbors who didn't like him. Maybe it really was one of his friends playing a prank on him that went a little too far and they didn't want to own up to it. Or maybe it was a total stranger, someone who just wanted to give someone a scare. This was all speculation on my part, of course, because that's all I have, really. We don't know what exactly happened that night, and we never will. All I know is that the circuit breaker was tripped multiple times, causing the power outages. It certainly was not due to us overloading the power. A human hand flipped those switches and banged on the door. After that night, staying at my aunt's didn't seem quite so bad. For a while, nothing else really happened. My friend deeply believed his little salt-cleansing ritual paid off and warded away whatever came to the door that night. Whether it was paranormal or not, it was certainly a night to remember. I still think it was the work of some weirdo, and the only reason it didn't go any further was because they saw two able-bodied men and not someone alone inside. This happened when I worked for a relatively small company. I worked in a quiet little office and I was new. I was pretty eager to impress. I had something big on the next day. I think it was a presentation or something maybe. I wanted to stay late and do a little overtime in order to be properly prepared for the presentation the following morning. Usually the president of the company would also be in the office until everyone left. He was a real workaholic like that. However, this night, and by that point it was night by the way, I was pulling some crazy hours, and even he wasn't there anymore. I can't remember exactly what caused him to leave. I think he had to go do something else somewhere, which meant that he couldn't be there with me. All I remember is that I got an email from him at one point and told him I was going to be doing some overtime. I had almost gotten the things I needed to get done, and about an hour and a half later, all I needed was to check over my work and get to the finish line. It was well within sight. In order to properly check, I needed a fresh cup of coffee though. I stood up in the office, and as I pulled my chair backward, I realized that I hadn't looked up in quite some time. This was the first time that I was in the office all alone. It was kind of liberating, I guess. I could do whatever I wanted. I decided to play some music through my phone. Back then, if you wanted music on your phone, you had to manually put it on there through a cable connected to your laptop or computer. I found the song I wanted to hear and pressed play. Not 10 seconds into the song, though, I heard 3 knocks in quick succession against the entrance door to the office. I grabbed my phone and shut off the music. I was thinking to myself, oh my god, someone's gonna complain now. I'd forgotten how late it was and how unusual this circumstance was. We were not exactly operating in business hours here. What I mean by that is I failed to grasp that there would be no reason for someone to be knocking on the office door at this time. I froze, but I knew we had a little monitor system by the door at the reception that showed the outside. I wandered over to take a look at who was knocking, but it seemed that no one was out there. I was scared now. I was alone in the office, only a 20-year-old woman. If this was going to be a break-in or something, I don't think I could do anything to stop them. I felt defenseless. I hoped that whoever was out there would just go away all on their own. I was terrified I would hear another bunch of knocks coming. I thought that would be the worst thing imaginable at that point, but I was wrong. The knocks didn't come. Instead, all of a sudden, the power went out altogether, and I was plunged into darkness. I couldn't help but feel even more scared. I traced my way back to my desk using only my hands to guide me. I found my mobile phone and called my boss. I was shaking with fear. I didn't want someone to break in and find me in the dark. Now that I had my phone, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I didn't care about that final proofread anymore. I went to get up from my office chair, but I felt a dead weight against my left leg. I thought I'd just wrapped it around my handbag or my umbrella, but as the feeling became more clear, I knew that wasn't what I was feeling. There was a hand grasped around my leg. They were gripping on tight. I looked down and aimed a dim light from my phone's home screen toward my legs. I swear I could see a woman's arm grabbing me. I screamed and screamed. I kicked frantically, and I saw a head turn in that darkness. I thought that the owner of those hands was about to confront me directly. I knew deep down that I certainly didn't want to look into this person's eyes. I managed to kick them hard enough to make them let go and took off running through the formation of empty desks in the dark, slamming against them. I had too much adrenaline in my body to care about the pain, though. As I stopped by the door, I suddenly remembered all the banging I'd heard earlier. I froze in place. I slumped in the corner for a few moments until I heard the sound of a chair moving in the back of the office near my desk area. That was it for me. I got out of there as soon as I could. My boss had missed my call earlier, so he actually called me back to check in, as he hadn't been able to reach me. He said he'd called the office multiple times and my phone was busy. I guess that in the melee, I must have knocked my phone off the hook. I knew why he was worried. Now, I don't know what exactly happened that night. I don't know what to think when I think back on the way those hands grabbed against my leg. Was it just a hallucination from overworking, or was there really a human being in there with me? I have no idea what the bang sound was either, or if it was even connected. I hope not, because if it was, then I imagine that whoever was clinging on to my legs must have had a partner or something. Either way, it was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. This happened roughly 30 years ago. It's something I've only told to a few select people up until now. It happened one night. Me and my girlfriend at the time drove down to the beach after work. I went to pick her up and we headed straight down there. However, when we arrived, the beach was already pitch black. I mean, we should have known better not to go so late, but for some reason, we both really wanted to go that night. It was roughly about 10 p.m. by the time we arrived and got out of the car. We were talking, eating some McDonald's we had stopped to get on the way there, and looking out at the darkness. At least we could see the waves rolling against the beach, and that was worth the drive, I supposed. I couldn't stay out too long, though, as I had work early the next morning. My girlfriend didn't respond when I asked if she might have been annoyed at me for saying that I had to leave so soon. I looked over at her to see what was wrong, and I noticed that she seemed to be transfixed on something out at sea. "What's wrong?" I asked her. She didn't answer, so I looked at the direction she was looking in. I could see a strong beam of light swaying across the waves far from the shoreline. "Is that a squid fishing boat or something?" "I don't know," I said to her. "I don't think so. The light doesn't seem right." "Hey, don't you think that's getting closer?" I looked out at sea, and I agreed that whatever this bright light was, it definitely seemed to be getting closer and closer. It was shaking as it moved along the waves, and it looked as though it was heading right for shore. "Maybe it's a fireball," she said. Fireballs are like will-o'-the-wisps, by the way, a kind of paranormal phenomenon said to take place in Japan, like a little orb or something, a very bright ball of fire that appears at night. I thought that if it was one of those, then it wouldn't be shining quite so brightly as this. "Then do you think that's a UFO?" She said it so excitedly that I was kind of taken aback. I didn't know until that point that she had an interest in the paranormal at all. I looked over at this mysterious light, ever increasing in brightness and slowly getting closer. She was right. It wasn't the flickering kind of dim light you'd expect from a fireball. It was like a strong, bright searchlight shining through the waves. I heard myself absent-mindedly agreeing with her. Yeah, I guess it could be a UFO. At that point, the light was only about 200 meters away from us. The beach we'd driven to was a very secluded one, and the shore wasn't that far away from where you could park your car. As what we thought was a UFO approached, I noted that I wasn't feeling scared just yet. I was just thinking to myself, wow, this is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of deal, huh? That was when my girlfriend suddenly called out to me. "Hey, that light's going on to the shoreline now." Yeah, it was. I was snapped out of my state of awe. I began to panic as I saw the light go over the waves and arrive at the shore. I knew that whatever this was, it was going to illuminate the sand on the beach. Next, the gravity of the situation set in for me. I didn't know quite what I was seeing, but I figured we'd better get out of here right now. I started the ignition and pulled a U-turn, then drove out of the beach area at breakneck speed. As I drove, my girlfriend continued to stare at the mysterious light source. At that point, I heard her call out in a frightened voice, "It's shining right where we were just parked!" I was really panicking now. I was driving for my life. I felt like a rally driver. At one point, I even drifted back out onto the sand. Finally, we made it back onto the main roads, which were well lit. A sense of security we'd lost down by the shore slowly came back to us. I pulled over, and I remember I had goosebumps all over my arms. When I took my hands off the steering wheel, I noticed they were drenched in sweat. We spent the rest of the journey in a hushed silence. I think neither of us knew what to really say to comfort the other. If she was anything like me, then she was replaying that over and over in her head. What was that weird, mysterious light advancing on us? It was heading straight for us, and moreover, it seemed to linger at where we'd just parked as we were escaping. It was like whatever this was coming for us specifically. I dropped her off at her place, and when I got back to mine, I laid down on my bed, wondering if that even really just happened, or if it was some kind of dream or misunderstanding. I met my girlfriend the following day, and I asked her outright, "That wasn't a dream, was it?" "No, of course not. I was there with you." The previous night, she had been so sure it was a UFO, but now she was questioning herself and seemed much more skeptical. I didn't know what it was myself. I didn't have any form of answer for her. Whatever the mysterious chasing light was, we never saw it again. One thing I can tell you is that I ended up marrying that girlfriend. About 20 years on from that night at the beach, the memory of that strange, bright light had faded away completely, until one night. We were watching a TV show about Japanese national abduction cases. For those unaware, there are a large number of missing persons cases, many of which are tied to North Korea. Approximately 470 people have been abducted by them, according to the Japanese government. As of November 2021, abduction to North Korea could not be ruled out for a further 873 individuals. During the TV show, they showed a map of all the locations where they believed the people had been captured and taken away. What did we see on that map? None other than the secluded beach we'd driven down to that night. I looked over at my wife. She was still staring at the TV, stunned. We did not encounter a UFO that night. We likely encountered a North Korean raid ship coming to shore. They easily could have seen us pull in and park in that area. I felt a chill race down my spine. I realized we could have ended up in North Korea, the same as those kidnapped victims, if I didn't drive off exactly when I did. We both would have been taken, and who knows what would have happened to us. To this day, whenever North Korea appears in the news, I think to myself how lucky I am to live the peaceful life I have with my wife now. The realization that it wasn't something paranormal, but people with the most evil intentions, was hands down the scariest moment of my life. This was a really weird story that happened quite a long time ago. When I was younger, me and my friends tried to start a heavy metal band. We lived in rural Kentucky, where most of the older folks around only listened to country music. All of our parents were heavily anti-anything that wasn't country, and wouldn't let us practice when they were home. We had to do it when they weren't there. Well, even if we didn't use an amp, they would somehow seem to be able to hear it and get all pissy about it. So you could see our dilemma. One night, our lead singer Jeff came to us with an idea. He lived in a rural area, and told us he had been out driving and stumbled across an old abandoned house out in the country. It had a big yard and was far away from anyone else. It was the perfect place for us to go out and practice in. I thought it was a bit weird, but everyone else seemed to like the idea. We packed up everything in his pickup truck and went out driving the next day. I lived in town, so these country drives were not something I went through a lot. I was sitting in the back seat with two of the other guys and some of our equipment. We drove out for over an hour, down the roads and through the hills, until we were further out in the woods than I'd ever been in my entire life. We finally came upon the old house. It was a big 2-story home that you could clearly tell was abandoned. It had a huge yard and porch, and was pretty cool actually. We started practicing, and it was probably the best session we ever had. We had so much fun, and kept practicing until late into the afternoon and evening. None of us really wanted to be stuck hanging out there after dark though. Well, that was any one of us except for Jeff. He was drinking a lot more beer than the rest of us that night, and whenever he did that, he would get really adamant about practicing later into the night. It took a lot of convincing to finally get him to agree that it was time to head home. Other than his sheer insistence on staying out, it had been a pretty good day all around. It was not fully dark out yet when we were packing everything back in the truck. I was loading my drums on there when one of my bandmates grabbed me and began tugging me on the arm. He pointed toward the house and told me that he'd seen someone standing back there and watching us. The person had ducked back behind the house though, before I had the chance to see anyone. I didn't know whether or not someone was really there, but either way, that was just one more reason for me to get out of there. We had no reason to believe anyone actually lived in the home, as no one had confronted us during all the hours we had been out there. Jeff, being the drunk and abrasive person that he normally was, however, wanted to see if someone really was behind the house. Absolutely none of us were going to go back there with him. We tried to convince Jeff that we just needed to go, but being the drunken idiot he was, he decided to walk back there, mocking whoever was there, calling for them like they were a chicken or something. It got really quiet for a moment when Jeff went behind the house. Carl, the driver, started the truck up. He just wanted to get out of there as soon as we could. We heard Jeff yell out in pain and come quickly running out from behind the home. He was yelling at us to get going right now. He ran up to the truck and managed to climb in the back with me and the others, as Carl gladly began driving out of the yard and back out onto the country roads. As we drove off, I was looking back at the house, trying to see if I could notice anyone there. That was when I noticed 3 big figures standing beside it and watching us as the truck drove out of there. Jeff had a huge gash in the side of his arm, and we had to rush him to the hospital. The only thing he claims to have remembered, as he was really out of it, was a large man with a hunting knife who slashed his arm open. He didn't seem to recall much else, other than running and jumping into the truck though. Needless to say, we never did go back to that house again. I grew up in the country and remember it fondly, although it's not all perfect, like a lot of people might want you to think it is. My great-uncle, for interest, was this church-going World War I vet that everyone respected. A lot of people respected him even more for the big fields of weed he grew, and then sold to just about everyone around. Plus, there was a lot of fighting and even gun violence that went on out there. Most of it was not reported or paid attention to. Even when it was, you didn't hear about it as much. I would drive up to my great-uncle's house normally every weekend. When he was getting older, he needed a lot of help taking care of his farm. I didn't get involved with the whole weed operation though, just with the other stuff. I didn't even know about the other stuff until I was older, but when I was around 14, I was allowed to drive the old pickup truck out there and help them out. I would normally then drive back home on Saturday night. I think when I was about 15, I got a late start home. I wanted to get home soon because there was something on late TV that I really wanted to watch. I wouldn't have been able to do so at my uncle's place because they didn't have a television. I would get home in time. That wasn't even something I was worried about. However, I didn't have a lot of practice driving after dark. We all lived out in the hills, but it took a while to get from one place to another. It was rare to run into other cars out on those roads, during the day, mind you, much less at night. I wasn't really paying a lot of attention as I listened to some music on the radio. At some point, though, I nearly missed a car heading my way. We would have had a head-on collision if I hadn't pulled swiftly to the right side. As I kept driving, I noticed the car immediately turn around and begin to follow me. I was worried about the driver being pissed about the near collision. After a while, though, I wasn't so sure. He wasn't doing anything aggressive like tailgating me or anything like that. He was just following me from a moderate distance. As the road turned up the side of the hill, there was no barrier on the outside of the road. That was when the car began to get aggressive. He drove right up against the back of my truck and began to bump into me several times. We weren't going extremely fast, but the road was narrow, and the slightest mistake could send me plummeting down the side of that hill. I tried speeding up every time he tried to bump me, but I could only do it so much without risking driving right off the side. It occurred to me that this was exactly what he was trying to make happen. That, of course, scared the hell out of me. I tried to focus on my driving. I did a pretty decent job focusing and calming down. However, right as I did, I heard a gunshot come from right behind me. It was an unmistakable sound. I knew someone in the car behind me was firing at me. I think whoever fired thought it would cause me to speed up or lose control. Fear at hearing it, however, did the exact opposite. I slammed on the brakes on my truck. The car then had to hit their own brakes and tried to turn to avoid hitting me. This car that had just been trying to drive me off the road ended up careening right off the side themselves. I didn't know what to do. I was a terrified 15-year-old boy. Rather than do anything at all, I just drove home. I wasn't going to go back and check on someone who was just trying to drive me off the road and shooting at me. The most I could do was make a call to the police when I got home about an accident out on that hill. No one was seriously injured. The car ended up slamming into a tree, I guess. It was in the papers, and I found out who it was that was following me. Some pretty dangerous guys. I was terrified for a long time that they might have known who I was and tried to retaliate. I saw them several times in town and at school, though, and they never did anything. I guess I was lucky, and they had no idea who I was. I made really sure to get home before dark after that. When I was growing up, I would normally get to spend about a month to 6 weeks of the summer at my cousin's home. My mom and dad had a whole lot of problems, so this was always rather nice for me. My aunt and uncle weren't like them at all. They didn't drink a lot, and they always had plenty of things for us to do. It was always the high point of my year, getting to spend some time with some people who actually acted like my family and like they loved me. My family lived in the suburbs of a nearby city. It was about a 4-hour drive out to the country area where my cousin's family lived. I can still picture their house in my mind even all these decades later. They lived about an hour outside of their own town. I even loved the ride to and from their town because the countryside was so beautiful. My cousin Clay and I would always ride in the bed of the truck with our root beer and candy, looking out across the trees and fields as we drove along. When we were about 13 years old, Clay and I started watching scary movies, renting them from the video store. In the 80s, there were tons of scary movies at those. We were really into anything scary. My uncle and a friend of his thought that horror movies weren't really all that scary, though. They would tell us we didn't know the first thing about being scared. One night, we were watching a movie, and my uncle and his friend asked if we were brave enough to go for a ride in the back of the truck at night. We had done this before, and we actually both found it pretty frightening. We enjoyed that sort of thing, though, so we agreed to go for a ride with the two of them. Nothing scary happened for the longest time, of course. I mean, generally, we were as scared as two 13-year-old kids would be in such a situation. But of course, we were also having a good time. That was until the strangest thing happened. Both my cousin and I were sitting against the left wall of the bed of the truck. We were looking at the inside part of the road, which led out to the deeper forest. As the truck drove on, we both saw this white, almost inhuman-looking being that was standing right by the side of the road. As the truck went past it, it tried to reach out and grabbed at the vehicle. We watched its hand graze the side. Both Clay and I were terrified and began pounding on the front window. Clay's dad was about to pull the truck over to see what was wrong, but Clay told him to drive faster. I was looking behind us to see if I could see the thing there, but I couldn't see anything. After he stopped the truck and got out to see what was wrong, both Clay and I told him we had seen some creature and begged him to get back in and go on. The two men instead took a flashlight out of the cab and walked back to take a chance at finding what the two of us had seen. For the short time they were away, Clay and I were so scared. We were sitting with our backs to the cab of the truck. We barely moved, as we kept expecting to see the creature again. It seems like my uncle and his friend were gone for a long time, but eventually they came back. They didn't see anything back there, and told us we were just imagining things. We had no idea how the two of us would have imagined seeing the exact same thing, though. The rest of the ride was pretty terrifying until we got home. When we told our aunt what happened, she accused her husband of setting the whole thing up. Although, of course, he denied this. If he had it set up, he's not admitted it to me or Clay to this very day. Whatever it was really scared the crap out of both of us, but more so while we waited in the cab for my uncle to return. I once was visiting my aunt out on the ridge. When I was a kid and a teenager, I used to always love going over to their house. As I got older and moved out on my own, I still like to pay them visits from time to time. However, on one of those visits, something went remarkably wrong. Nothing bad happened at their house, mind you. It was just a nice visit, and my uncle decided to have a few beers with me. This happened a long time ago, and people would drink and drive a lot more back then than they do nowadays. I would never do something like that at the present, but on that night I did. I wasn't totally drunk by the time I was ready to head home, but I was definitely worse off than I probably should have been. When I drove out of my aunt's long driveway, I immediately made my first mistake. I turned in the wrong direction on the very first turn, and instead of heading out for the town I lived in, I headed deeper into the ridge. Once I got far enough out to completely realize I had gone the wrong way, I wasn't exactly sure what to do. I decided to keep driving until I could find a driveway to turn myself around. The rural road was way too narrow to do a turnaround in the road itself. I had to find a way to get back the way I had come. I had never driven out in that direction past my aunt's house before, so I had no idea how many other homes were out there, nor where the road would eventually lead to. After driving for quite a long time without coming across any driveways, I began to wonder what even was the point of this road. I mean, there may have been a driveway or two before I realized I'd gone the wrong way, but since then there'd been no sign of civilization at all. I'd been driving for quite a while too. All I could guess is that it must have eventually spilled out onto a main road off the ridge, but I hadn't come close to seeing anything like that yet. I kept driving. I can't tell you how long that I was out there driving even. I was quite tipsy in the beginning, but I drove for so long that I began to sober up. I couldn't precisely tell if that was because of how long I'd been out there or because of the fear of the situation though, but it definitely wore down, and as it did, the fear grew exponentially. It didn't seem like this made any sense. I kept driving and driving on this twisting and turning road, and there wasn't anything at all. It didn't seem like it was possible for the road to keep going on forever, but that's exactly what seemed to be happening. My normally rational mind even began wondering what would happen if I was never able to find my way off this never-ending road. It was during my panicking that something caught my eye further up ahead. It looked like there was someone walking along the side. It wasn't easy to make out at first because it was so dark outside, and the only light at all was the feeble light coming from my headlights. I could definitely see someone walking along the side of the road up ahead of me though. At first, I wondered if I should stop and ask for some help, but the situation had been scary enough up to that point that I really didn't want to. Who knew what a person walking around that late at night in the middle of nowhere would even be up to? Plus, it looked like he was dragging something along behind him. The whole thing just rubbed me the wrong way. As I got closer and eventually passed alongside the man, I got a better look at what he was dragging. It appeared to be a person being dragged by their legs along the side of the road. As I drove by terrified, the man didn't even look over at me. He seemed oblivious that I was even there. I drove a little further before I finally found a driveway to turn around. However, I was not looking very forward to driving back in that direction. I had a tire iron in my car that I could use if I had a problem with the guy from earlier. I just assumed he must have murdered the person he was dragging along. I didn't know how much longer I would have to be driving if I kept going in the direction I was going. I decided there was no way to go back but the way I came. Scared, I turned around and went back in that direction. Every moment, I kept expecting to run into the man dragging the body. It should have happened fairly quickly, actually, as the driveway appeared very shortly after I'd seen him, but I didn't see him at all. He didn't have much time to have gotten off the road and disappeared either. It seemed as though he'd just vanished. If that wasn't the strangest part, the next thing definitely was. In less than a half an hour of driving back in that direction, I passed by my aunt and uncle's driveway. I knew for a fact I had been out there driving for much longer than just 30 minutes, yet I had made it back in far less than that time. I had no explanation for it. It didn't make the rest of the ride back into town any easier on me either. By the time I got back home, I was able to fall asleep pretty easily, exhausted from the strange and terrifying events of the night. I've told this story to a few people over the years. Some people have believed me and some haven't, but those who didn't have never offered an explanation for what happened that night, and neither can I. One evening at my house in Red Bluff, California, I remember the power suddenly went out. It was around 9 p.m. or so I lit some candles for light before heading outside to gather my friends up for a game of hide and seek. The field where we decided to play had a grim history. About a year earlier, a man had been killed there. Despite this unsettling fact, we tried to push it out of our minds. As we played, laughing and joking, we lost track of time and realized it was getting quite late. We began searching for my sister, who was supposed to be hiding. It was then that we saw something that made our blood run cold. A dark, indistinct figure darting across the field. We were petrified, but ran toward the area where it had vanished, hoping to find my sister somewhere nearby. When we reached the spot, the figure was gone, and my sister was nowhere to be seen. Frightened, we decided to head back to the house. As we approached, though, my friend suddenly screamed. "How did you get up there? You were just behind us," they exclaimed. Confused, I turned around, only to see an additional member there standing with the group. My friends insisted that I'd been trailing behind them. Thing is, I'd been leading the group the entire time. They had even spoken to me while I was supposedly hanging around the back. Terrified, we all rushed inside and bolted the doors behind us. It turned out my sister had gone into the house right after we'd started playing and was already inside. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide with fear. A cold sensation seemed to almost seep into our home and heighten our unease. We huddled together, trying to make sense of what was going on. Every creak of the house and gust of wind outside seemed amplified, as if the darkness beyond the doors was pressing in on us. The chilling encounter with that dark figure put us on edge, unable to sleep. The lingering feeling that a malevolent presence was somewhere out there, watching us throughout the night, cast a shadow over the rest of our evening. We never did discover anything further. Let me start by saying the story I'm about to share happened almost exactly 4 years ago, and there are a lot of things I do not remember. Some of the information was told to me by others after the fact. That being said, everything is 100% true and really did happen to me. I apologize ahead of time, as this will be quite lengthy. In 2020, during the pandemic, I had just moved into a really cool old second-floor apartment in my town square. It was the first time I think I'd ever lived completely alone in my entire life. I was truly in love with the place. One day in late July, I left to go shopping and locked up my apartment, something my mother had practically pounded into me from my childhood. I never left my doors and windows unlocked. When I got home from shopping, I noticed a few things weren't where I thought I had left them. I mentioned this to my cousin Michelle. I told her I thought someone might have been in my place while I was gone. After discussing it with her, though, we came to the conclusion that I must have simply forgotten I had moved the items myself, and I didn't really think about it again. A couple of nights later, I was watching scary movies until about 2 o'clock in the morning when I decided to get ready for bed. I remember walking into my bathroom to change into my PJs and do my nightly routine. That's the last thing I remember until I woke up the next day. When I got out of bed, I immediately noticed something wrong with the clothes I had on. They were those PJ shorts that had the drawstrings around the waist. I always tied them to make them fit, but when I stood up, the drawstrings looked like they had broken. They were still tied, but were practically falling off of me. I told myself I must have moved around a lot in my sleep, and the string must have snapped or something. I headed to the bathroom for my morning routine. When I walked by my bathroom mirror, I turned to look at myself. It didn't seem like anything was wrong, but for some reason I felt really weird. Out of sorts, I guess you'd say, even more so than usual. In fact, the longer I was awake, the stranger I started to feel. I was developing a severe headache, and my vision was extremely blurry. I went to grab my phone from my nightstand to check what time it was. I guess I'd forgotten to charge it before going to bed, because my phone was dead. I took my phone to the living room and found the charger. I plugged it in. I stood there waiting for my phone to come on. When it finally did, I was shocked to see it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This was highly unusual for me. No matter what time I go to bed, I usually wake up around 7 or 8 in the morning. This is when I began to panic. Like I said, this was not normal for me. I began rubbing my face with my hands, and that's when I felt that something was wrong with my face. I ran back to the bathroom mirror. This time when I looked though, I realized that my vision was so blurry that I couldn't see my face at all, no matter how close I got to the mirror. It looked like a dense fog, or like when you take a super hot shower and the mirror fogs over, except none of that was going on at all. This is when I realized that something was very wrong with me. I was disoriented, confused. I stumbled back into my living room to check and see if my phone had charged up enough so I could call a family member or friend to come over. It was only at 5%, but I decided I'd just keep it plugged in and try to call Michelle or my son. I picked up my phone and stared at it, but realized that I couldn't remember how to use my phone to call or text anyone. I knew that I should logically know how to use my own phone, but for some reason I found I didn't have the capability. I was getting scared, but most of all frustrated. I knew how to use this thing, but my brain refused to register. Soon after this, a flood of messages and missed calls came through. I was finally able to text a friend and told him I was having some sort of emergency. I needed them to contact my sister to get someone to my apartment ASAP. I was becoming more disoriented the longer I was awake. My sister had gotten a hold of my son, and he was on his way. I thought I should probably go downstairs to unlock the door to the stairway, but I was feeling so strange and off balance that I couldn't make my way down the steps. Eventually, I dragged my way down and unlocked the door. It was already unlocked though, and in my confusion, I'd actually locked it. I went back upstairs the way I went down, sitting and dragging my way back up. Soon, I received a call from my son, telling me the door was locked and he couldn't get inside. I had to repeat the entire process again. I opened the door, and my son, along with his girlfriend and my 7-month-old granddaughter, took one look at me, and his eyes widened in shock. "What happened to you?" I had no idea what he was talking about. I went back to my bathroom mirror, where my vision had recovered enough to see a horrific sight. There was a giant bump in the middle of my forehead the size of a tennis ball. My right eye was completely swollen shut, and I had one heck of a black eye. My left eye was partially swollen as well, and I had bruises all over me. Certainly explained why I'd slept for 14 hours straight. I informed my son of everything I'd done that I remembered since going to bed the night before. I left out the fact the drawstring on my shorts had been broken. Michelle showed up and told me I needed to go to the ER and get checked out, as we kept discovering numerous injuries on me, besides the ones that were clearly visible. I had bruises in the shape of large fingerprints on my upper arms, not my own, clearly. There were red marks around my wrists and both of my ankles, and I had rug burn-type injuries on my shins and knees. I was still very confused. I have no memory of what took place during those 14 hours. It's just nothingness, a black hole in my memory, even when I try to remember now. I was taken to our local hospital's ER. The nurse practitioner on call kept asking me what happened, even though I told her I had no idea. She asked if I was in a relationship with someone. I informed her that I was single and not seeing anyone at the time. She didn't believe me and called the police. I was confused, so I get why she didn't believe me. That was when she said to me, "If you don't remember what happened, there's not much I can do. But I can tell you with 100% certainty, you could not cause these injuries to yourself. Someone did this to you." The police never did come in to talk to me. I was discharged into the care of Michelle. I couldn't be left alone due to my condition, so it was arranged that I would stay the night with Michelle and my Aunt Kay. I was told if I got nauseated or started vomiting or my confusion or headache got worse, to call 911 immediately. That's exactly what ended up happening about 2 hours later. I was horribly dizzy and tried to eat something. At that point, I began hallucinating. At first, it was just auditory. I was sitting with my aunt on her bed watching TV, when all of a sudden I noticed the movie had completely different dialogue that I didn't remember being in this particular film. At that point, the characters in the movie began speaking directly to me. I don't remember what they were saying. I kept glancing between the TV and my aunt to see if the same thing was what she was experiencing. I was aware that I was hallucinating, but I had no control over it. At that point, the paranoia started, and then the vomiting, and my cousin called 911. When the ambulance showed up, the police also showed up and began talking to my cousin. When they asked me what hospital I wanted to go to, I told them the name. My cousin, who knew me very well, knew I would never ask to go to this particular place because of a previous experience. Because it was incredibly late at night, and the hospital I was taken to was 25 minutes away, no one in my family met me there, and the hospital did not even try to call my family for information. I don't remember what I did or what I said to anyone after that. It was all so confusing. I was hallucinating. It must have been really bad, as I was committed to the hospital's psych floor for a traumatic brain injury for 11 days. Still to this day, I have no idea what happened to me. I don't really want to remember, seeing as all the medical professionals and my own healthcare providers who saw my injuries say I have been attacked by someone. It's scary to think of all the possibilities. Was someone hiding in my house waiting for me that night without me knowing? Could it have been one of the people I saw walking around the town square earlier that day? Worse yet is the thought of wondering if it's someone I still have in my life now. I'm not sure which is worse, not knowing at all, or having the memories of it forever. If you've read this post, thank you. I've been very reluctant to share this story, but writing out all the details that I do remember has been very therapeutic in a way. I'll try to be as brief as possible and stick to the relevant events that are giving me this feeling. The latest event happened just last night, and I didn't get much sleep, so apologies if I ramble a bit. My wife and I recently purchased our first home after the birth of our daughter. Everything was as you would expect for the first few months. Painting, decorating, renovating, basking in our newfound slice of the American dream. You get the idea. Unusual things started happening several months ago, though. One day, as I was just getting home after work, I passed by this strange truck, 2 or 3 houses down from ours. Now, I say strange for a few reasons. We literally know everyone in our small neighborhood, and I'd never seen this truck before. There was no reason for through traffic to come down our street, and the truck was driving very slowly. The sort of driving you'd get if you put the car in drive but didn't press on the gas at all. As I pulled into the driveway, the car immediately flipped a U-turn and came back towards my house. Getting out of my vehicle, the truck crawled by, and I could see the driver staring daggers at me as he passed. He then sped off. I don't like to judge based on appearances, and I'd like to think I don't scare that easily, but something about this guy's eyes gave me a bad feeling. Obviously, this was very weird. I mentioned what happened to my wife, telling her maybe we should be more mindful about security. When I told her about the type of truck I'd seen, my wife had this to add. That same truck drove by and that guy stared at me when I got home this afternoon. I thought he was just being creepy and checking me out. I tried to tease her a bit to lighten the mood, calling her cocky for assuming any guy driving by must be checking her out. I didn't want her to get unnerved, but I was definitely freaking out a bit. We continued to see the truck multiple times over the next couple of weeks, either driving by slowly or parked just down the block and facing our yard. One day, the truck just stopped driving by, and we didn't see it ever since. I sort of dismissed the whole thing as me being paranoid because of that, but then other strange things started happening. In the past month or so, my wife and I have been hearing tapping on the windows at the front of our house at night. It's happened 2 or 3 times to each of us separately, always at exactly 10 or 11. always a soft and distinct tapping. It almost sounded like someone knocking with a single knuckle on the metal part of a screen door, if that makes sense. The first time that my wife and I heard the tapping together was just last weekend. We were in the front room playing with our daughter. It was around 9:30 or so. We were about to settle her down for bed. Our front room has a large, almost floor-to-ceiling window running the length of the wall next to the door. It faces the street. We were all sitting on the floor with our backs to that window, reading our daughter a book, when we began to hear it. Now, our house is older. Creaks and cracks are not uncommon, but this sound was so distinct and intentional that my wife and I immediately looked at each other and bolted out of the room. Had my wife and daughter locked themselves in a back room, while I turned on all the lights and did a sweep around the outside of the house. Of course, I didn't see anything. I was ready to dismiss this all as nothing more than paranoia, or something that probably had an innocent explanation. That was until last night. Around 9:45, we heard our daughter making noise in the baby monitor. I waited a few minutes to see if she would settle down a bit, but when it became clear she would not, I got up to put her back to sleep. The layout of the room is important to visualize this next part. This room is on the side of our house, but the exterior wall juts out in a bit of an L shape, and the corner of the L is made up of windows. If you're standing in the door to the room, you're directly across from these windows. There's a rocking chair in the other corner pointed toward the front of the house. One window faces the street, the other faces our neighbor's house. A garden bed planted with small shrubs wraps around the outside directly underneath. I was sitting in that chair getting my daughter settled down. I had a lamp on, so the room was softly lit. Once she fell asleep, I stood up to put her in her crib when something strange caught my eye. There was a figure standing about a foot away from the window, in the space between the shrubs and the house. They were staring in at us. I didn't look long enough to see anything more than what appeared to be a man in a light gray hoodie, standing a few feet away on the other side of the glass. Sprinting from the room, I brought my daughter back to my wife and I's bedroom, leaving her there while telling my understandably confused wife to lock the door. After turning off all the lights inside and turning on all the lights outside, I began moving from room to room, peering out the windows into the darkness. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Whoever it was must have taken off after seeing me notice them and made a quick exit. Obviously, I had some trouble sleeping after this. I spent hours checking security cameras and going from room to room looking out the windows, hoping but also not hoping I would see anything that could explain what had happened. This morning, I went outside to the spot where I thought the figure would have been standing. I'd hoped that maybe there was a plant or something I mistook for a person, but when I got to that spot, I realized the figure had been standing in a bare patch of ground directly in front of that window. With everything that's been happening, I can't shake the feeling that for some reason, there's somebody watching our family. I just hope I'm wrong. My name is Bree. This happened in 2016. I was 19 years old at the time. I was up late the night before into the early morning studying, and I hadn't had very much sleep. I had just woken up from a nap I'd taken to catch up, and I decided to hop in the shower to wake myself up a bit. And that's when I started to hear this weird scraping sound coming from somewhere outside. I stopped the shower and peered out from behind the curtain. I then made my way over to the window. I couldn't see anything out there, but I could still hear that scraping noise. I thought it may have been my neighbor working in a shed or something, so I ignored the disturbance and finished up my showering business before I continued. I should inform you that I have severe anxiety problems, and I often get a little bit paranoid. It doesn't help that I have a form of PTSD as well. Anyway, I was now back in my room. I took a seat on my bed and texted my boyfriend. I asked him what he wanted for dinner. While I was waiting for him to respond, I relaxed and scrolled through my Facebook. I was reading an article about the recent clown sightings that were happening at the time. That was when I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming from outside. I stopped and listened in carefully. I could hear more footsteps, followed by a tapping noise. I was a bit confused. It hadn't yet occurred to me that I could have an unwelcomed guest outside. I was thinking to myself, why wouldn't my boyfriend knock on the door or call before he showed up? We usually had a routine with things like this, especially if I was home alone. He would either call or FaceTime me to let me know when he was on his way. There had been a lot of shady activity around our neighborhood at the time. I called out, and suddenly all fell silent. I texted my boyfriend and asked him if that was him at the door. There was no reply. I decided to peek through the bedroom window. While I was making my way to the other side of the room, my phone started ringing. It was my boyfriend wanting to FaceTime. When I answered, he said he was 15 minutes away. As I was talking to him, I pulled back the curtains of my bedroom window, and that's when all the blood in my veins turned to ice. I found myself face to face with a clown. I knew I wasn't hallucinating. An actual clown was looking at me through the window, smiling. After my initial shock, I actually started to laugh, thinking that this had to be some sort of prank my boyfriend was pulling on me. I played along, pretending to be terrified, and whispered into my phone. Very funny. I love the whole scary clown thing. I chuckled and rolled my eyes. My boyfriend was very confused. I explained to him about the clown at the window and said that he and his friend had done a good job scaring the piss out of me again. He said that all his friends were hanging out at the pub and that he was not part of any plans to prank me. Upon hearing this, I felt my stomach in my throat. I looked back at the clown outside. He reached into his costume and pulled out a very real-looking knife. By this point, I wasn't sure what was going on. I grabbed up my baseball bat. My boyfriend told me he was now only a few minutes away and shouted at me to stay inside and lock all the doors and windows. I quickly closed the curtains and went into the lounge. It wasn't long before I heard a loud pounding at the front door. Suddenly, I heard a creepy voice coming from the other side. "Let me in." I didn't respond to that voice. I stood perfectly still, waiting for their next move. The loud pounding rang out again, causing the door to rattle in its hinges, but I kept quiet even as I heard the doorknob rattling. I was pretty scared at this point, but I was also getting really irritated. Eventually, I had enough and yelled out, "Hey, fuck off! Go annoy someone else!" I heard a muffled laughter, followed by the creepy voice once more. "Please let me in, doll. I just want to play. I want to play with your insides." I had enough of this. I was about to go outside and beat this guy's ass myself. That was when I heard my boyfriend's voice, who was still on the phone. He said to hang up and call the cops. After some consideration, I thought maybe confronting the clown outside holding a knife was not the correct course of action, so I did as my boyfriend said. I left the lounge and was soon explaining the situation to the police dispatcher. I was on my way back to my room when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I stopped in my tracks and told him I thought the guy had just broken into my house. They immediately told me to get somewhere safe. That's when I heard my boyfriend yelling out, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get out of here! The police are on their way!" The clown just bellowed out a psychotic laugh. They took off. As I made my way back into the bedroom, something caught my eye. I peered out the window through a gap in the curtains and saw another clown. He appeared to be holding some sort of blade in his hand. I went to move, but I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I couldn't do anything. Fear overcame me as I realized my boyfriend was out there with these two creepy clowns. I screamed into the phone that there was another one outside my bedroom. After a few moments, I was relieved when I heard my boyfriend at the back door. I let him inside, and we held each other until the police arrived. After taking our statements, the police discovered a rusted hacksaw and an axe lying on the ground outside my bedroom window. Of course, the creepy clowns that had turned my night into a freak show were nowhere to be found. After that night, I struggled to fall asleep. I often think to myself, what would have happened to me if I had been stupid enough to open that door? Were they just a couple of thrill seekers looking to frighten a girl who was all alone? Or were they in fact out for blood? The following happened last summer, and I haven't told anyone about it yet for some reason. I like taking late-night walks, especially during the summer. One night, I decided to take an unusual route, which I would later greatly regret. It was about 11 p.m. and the sun had already gone down. It wasn't completely dark yet, though. The road I was walking was quite long, and at the end of it, I could see someone moving toward me. I didn't think much of it, obviously. When he was about 90 feet away from me, though, he suddenly started to run. His running initially resembled somebody jogging, and that's what I thought he was doing at first, so I didn't really react. As he got closer, though, I could see he was wielding something in his hand. I now started to suspect something was wrong. He was finally about to run past me when he suddenly stopped right next to me and looked me in the eyes. He walked right up to me and said something that would haunt me forever from then on. "Why didn't you run? I could have killed you. I think you should run next time." As he was standing there next to me, I could see that the object he was holding was a stick taser like the ones you'd see guards using. The man then turned around and ran away. I still wonder what would have happened if I would have trusted my instincts in that moment and started to run. My family and I had a caravan in a holiday park in NSW. We would go there every school holiday, and there were many kids I used to run around and play with. I have very fond memories of this place, where I learned to ride a bike and had my first kiss even, but other memories are not as good, and now leave me with that egg flip feeling in my stomach. The people that owned the caravan park had a son. He was roughly 25 years old. I would have been around 5 or 6 at the time. He would drive around the park and collect everyone's rubbish on a tractor and do other odd jobs to help out his parents. Every once in a while, he would pull up when I was playing out front and ask if I wanted to ride on the tractor. Being young and naive, of course, I accepted and jumped right on. What child doesn't want to ride a tractor? This was back in the days where parents would let their children play in the streets. Without much or any supervision, you just came back home when the streetlights came on. One day, when he dropped me back to our van, my dad came storming out and grabbed me by the arm. He yanked me off the tractor. Without saying a word to the man, he took me inside and told me never ever to hang out with him again. "I don't want you going around with that man," he said, without saying why. "But he's nice. He gives me candy," I said. "Just don't. I'm telling you, do not talk to him," he replied. I couldn't understand why my dad didn't want me talking to such a nice man who gave me tractor rides, candy, and hugs, sometimes even the occasional sandwich. I remember just telling the man flat out one day, "My dad said I'm not allowed to talk to you anymore." He gave me a sort of smirk. "Oh yeah? Why's that?" Fast forward nearly 13 to 14 years later, my family and I were watching the news when suddenly the man's face flashed across the screen. It was attached to a story about how he'd killed multiple people and was now serving time in prison. My dad immediately caught on to this. Look at that! Look at that! I knew that guy was bad news. There was always something just off about him. You remember how he used to take you around on the tractor? My blood ran cold. My stomach dropped. The most disturbing part, he killed people with these pills he would make, that he called candies. Always listen to your parents. I would be dead by now if it weren't for them. This happened just a few hours ago. My house is on the very edge of town, just before a large wooded area. We do have some neighbors. There are around 6 apartments in total, and some houses across the street as well. It was around 11 p.m. though, and at that time most of them are usually asleep or sitting in front of their TV, or perhaps even both. I went to take my dog on a walk when I noticed a bike leaning against the wall in a driveway. That seemed odd. There's a bike rack behind the house. I didn't really think much of it though, and continued on my way. When I came back, the bike was still there. Now, there are walls on both sides of the driveway, about 5 feet tall at the highest point just behind the gate. I looked up at the wall to my left, only to stare right into the cold, dead eyes of a woman crouching there on top of it. It scared the hell out of me. I just kinda stared back for a second. I had never seen this woman before. She didn't move whatsoever. My dog also seemed to be getting scared as well. I rushed over to my door and never took my eyes off her. Once we had gone past her, she leapt off the wall and began to follow us. At that point, my dog, a pretty big Doberman mix, began growling and barking furiously. Luckily, that seemed to make her change her mind and stop coming any closer. I got inside the house and locked the door behind me. I was sure as hell glad to have my big dog with me. I don't know who that woman was or what she was up to, but the scariest part is, I realized that she had probably been waiting there even when I initially left. I was born, raised, and still live in Texas. I come from a family of hunters. It's pretty much a family tradition. I'm going to tell you about something I experienced when I was 20 years old, back in 2005. My father had just been diagnosed with lung cancer, and naturally everyone in my family was devastated by this, especially me. My dad and I were very close. I had a lot of other personal stuff going on in my life at the time, and I felt like I needed to go out for a few days just to clear my head a bit. I decided to make it a solo hunting trip and packed up some camping gear, along with my Marlin 336 set my dad had gifted to me when I was 18 years old. If I could get sentimental for a moment, my father ended up passing away 3 years after his diagnosis, and to this day I still use that very same rifle for hunting. Anyway, this happened around late October or early November. I don't want to be too specific with the location, because technically I was not supposed to be hunting in this specific area. I will disclose that it was somewhere near the Mexican border. This will be important later. I decided to set up camp for 3 days before heading back. I had been hunting on this land before with some friends of mine, and I knew the precautions to take not to be spotted by the game warden. I'm sure if there's any other hunters listening to this broadcast, they'll be more than happy to tell you we often wipe our asses with the rule book. Before anyone judges me too harshly, or the practice of hunting in general, I will say I'm a very spiritual person and have a profound respect for Mother Nature. I don't put trash everywhere, and every part of every animal I put down never goes to waste. I'll be the first to admit there are hunters that give us a bad name, and me not following rules is more of a middle finger to the government than it is to the sport of hunting. The first day went off without a hitch, no problems whatsoever, aside from the fact there was no game to be found anywhere. I figured I would head further south the next day to see if my luck would improve any. Other hunters knew about this restricted location and may have already cleaned out this area. As night fell, I found myself sprawled out next to my truck, staring at the night sky. I wondered if my dad and I would ever take another hunting trip together. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps slowly making their way through a nearby brush. This was alarming for obvious reasons. Whoever this was, they had the drop on me. I knew better than to light up a campfire under these circumstances, but if this person was roaming around in the dark without a flashlight, they may have had some kind of night vision apparatus, giving them the advantage. I was very concerned. If you were looking at me through the trees in that particular moment, it would have appeared as though I was sleeping. I was in an odd position where I was resting on top of my sleeping bag with a blanket because I felt claustrophobic being fully immersed in a sleeping bag. This happened to be a good thing because it meant I was able to mobilize myself quickly. Something told me I only had seconds to make a decision. I rolled sideways out of instinct, and as soon as I did so, I caught a glimpse of a muzzle flash coming from the tree line directly in front of me. I felt dirt fly in the air and hit my back from a bullet striking the ground where I had just been. I scrambled to my feet as more shots rang out from the trees. One of them shattered the passenger side window of my truck. I took cover behind the bed of my pickup and quickly drew the snub nose I had strapped to my ankle. After the gunfire ended, I laid down flat on the ground and returned fire in the direction of the trees from under the truck. I heard several sets of footsteps fleeing the area, but I held my position just in case my theory about night vision was correct. With only 2 rounds left in my revolver, I pretty much spent the rest of that night underneath my truck, pistol aimed at the darkness. I waited there until the sun came out and illuminated my surroundings. I very cautiously got out from beneath my vehicle and packed up my gear as quickly as I could. I hightailed it out of there. Later on, when I told a friend of mine about the incident, he said he wished I would have told him I was heading out that way. He said he would have warned me. The Mexican cartel had started using that area to smuggle contraband and people across the nearby border. This friend of mine was an immigrant from Mexico himself and had several family members mixed up in the cartel and coyote groups. Needless to say, I trusted his word. All things considered, I think I got off pretty easy. Had I been in my sleeping bag that night, no doubt that bullet would have nailed me. These days, I stick to designated hunting grounds. Some things are just not worth the risk. Okay, so buckle up because this is going to get weird. This isn't something unknown amongst my friends and the people local to me, as I live in quite a small town. In grade 5, I would have been about 13 or 14, and I had no friends. I was and still am kind of weird, and it tended to throw people off. Making friends in high school was so difficult for me because I refused to change who I was just to fit in. During the second week of school, I met George in my English class. Our teacher had sat us together, and we had begun talking and building a friendship. George seemed very nice, and we had a lot in common as well. He had come from a different elementary school. It was odd because people from his area commonly went to a different high school, although he insisted he wanted to go to this one because there were certain classes he wanted to take that the other school didn't offer. After about a week of talking together during English, he asked if I wanted to eat lunch with him. We had the same lunch period, and he said he noticed how often I sat alone. I thought it was the nicest gesture, so I agreed. We ended up having lunch together for a while, but then I started making some new friends. I always invited him to eat lunch with a few of the friends I had made, but he always declined. Then, one day in English, he passed me a note. This was very strange since we were sitting right next to each other. It said something like, "I need to talk to you. Can we please sit alone together for lunch?" I wrote back I would sit down with him, and we hardly spoke for the rest of the period. I started getting really weird vibes from him. So, lunchtime rolled around. I saw him sitting at the end of a row. I go to sit down and he says, "No, let's go outside to talk." I agreed. He looked really upset. I wanted to know what was going on. When we got outside, he led me over to sit on a curb in front of the school and started talking very aggressively. He told me it was unfair of me to make other friends when he was the one who'd befriended me first. He told me I had to eat lunch with him because when I was alone, he ate lunch with me. Now that he was alone, I was obligated to do the same. It was a very bizarre conversation. I explained that he could sit with me and my friends, and that way there would be no issues. He could even make some new friends himself. I had enough friendship to spread around, and he had nothing to be upset about. What he said next completely shocked me. I could see the anger in his eyes. He grabbed my arm real hard. "I don't think you understand. You owe me this. You will sit with me." I got freaked out at that point and told him we could sit alone together every other day. I just wanted to get away from him and go back inside where more people were around. After that day, I started getting these weird messages in my email. I'll never forget the first one. All it said was, "All women are Satan. The devil lives in all of you." I didn't recognize the address and assumed it was some internet troll trying to scare me. Then they started coming more frequently, all with the same type of message. I started getting scared, so I showed my friends these emails. They agreed that it was weird, but also agreed it was probably some random person just trying to scare people. One of my friends, though, told me that she thought it was George. She had heard some stories about why he'd come to our school instead of going to the other one. She told me he was so obsessed with one of the girls in his class that her mom had to get a restraining order against him over the summer. I told her that sounded insane, and I didn't believe it. I was having lunch with George on alternate days, and we were still friendly during English class, but I was trying to distance myself from him. After Christmas break, our schedules changed for second semester. I was very happy about this, because I knew I'd have a different lunch period and we wouldn't have English together anymore. I could slowly disassociate myself from him. I was wrong. He started leaving notes in my locker, confessing his undying love and explaining that we were meant to take over the world together. The feelings were very much not mutual. I had to tell him that enough was enough. I explained he was overwhelming me and I needed space from our friendship. He seemed to understand. He didn't get upset or yell. He just agreed to give me my space. In the meantime, the emails started getting much worse. They started threatening my life, telling me they knew where I lived and went to school. I went straight to my mom when this started happening. My mom called the police. The police informed the school. The school looked up the email in their records and found out it was indeed George sending those emails all along. He was suspended and wouldn't even look at me after. I was honestly so relieved. 1 year after we graduated high school, George and his mother went out for a drive. While she was driving, he stabbed her over 100 times. When the police found him, he tried saying it was a car accident, but when they questioned him further about all the stab wounds, he admitted to killing her. He claimed he was trying to release the devil from his mother's soul. He pleaded insanity and was found not criminally responsible for her murder. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. I know it's been quite a while since I did an outro. If you guys like this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback about the video itself, please be sure to leave it in the comments below. I always do read the comments, although with me recording every day, I don't have as much time to respond to them anymore. If you guys have a story you would like to send in yourselves, please be sure to look in the description below the video. There will be links to my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. You can go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to your story as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, the type of story if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, please be sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and as much correct grammar as possible, to ensure the best chances of your story appearing in a video. I think that's about it for this video here. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts about the channel or anything, and thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.